Well, so the next section will be the third one. We'll be talking about food hygiene. And this food hygiene, we're going to be covering good food hygiene, food safety hazards, who is at risk, prevention of food poisoning. The first one is good food hygiene. What is good food hygiene? Good food hygiene is all about controlling harmful bacteria. It's simple. Controlling harmful bacteria, which can cause serious illness. Now, in this good food hygiene, we've got four main things that we have to remember for good hygiene. I call them 4 C's. The first one is what we call cross-contamination. We're going to be covering this in this training and to details later on. Cross-contamination, cleaning, chilling, and also cooking. So these 4 things, they cover what we call good food hygiene: cross-contamination, cleaning, chilling, and also cooking. Okay. Now, the food safety hazard, remember, it is a condition or contaminant that can cause illness or injuries. So food safety hazard can be anything that enters into the food, whether visible such as hair, glass, wood, or invisible such as bacteria. So we're going to cover all these 3 food safety hazards. So biological hazard, chemical hazard, and physical hazard. Okay, so we're going to cover all these later on. But the first one is food, the biological hazard. Biological hazards occur when hazardous or pathogenic organisms are introduced in food and thus can pose a food safety concern to consumers. Now, biological hazard include bacteria, or we have viruses, we have also parasites such as E. coli, Trichinella, or Salmonella. Now, we're going to cover physical hazards and also chemical hazard later on. We're going to cover that later on. Okay, so the 3 types of food safety hazard. So we have the biological hazard, physical hazard, and also chemical hazard. So we're going to cover this later on into details. Now, when it comes to risk, who's at risk when it comes to food safety and hygiene? Everyone is at risk, but mostly babies, young children, pregnant women, and the elderly can be very quickly become ill when infected, probably because of the immune system is getting weak, or maybe their immune system is at a young age is not strong enough. So they are mostly at risk. So the children, younger children, babies, the pregnant women, and also the elderly. Symptoms of food poison illnesses. What are the symptoms? Diarrhea is one of them. Vomiting, stomach cramps, fever, nausea, headache, and also dizziness. So all these are the symptoms of that food poisoning. Can be nasty sometimes, you see, when you begin to vomit. You see, that's why the food that you eat, you've got to make sure that you buy it at the correct place where they have a good standard of food and safety and hygiene. Okay, very important because this is something that goes into the system. So you've got to make sure that you buy it at the correct and good price, reputable place where you think that, you know, it is good for you. How do you prevent the food poisoning? Can we prevent food poisoning? Of course we can. You know, sometimes it's all about avoiding those bad habits that sometimes we have when we are preparing food, when we are handling food, or sometimes when we are storing food. Those bad habits need to make sure that we get rid of them. How do we prevent food poisoning? wash hand thoroughly before handling food. Now, this is the basic sequence that we have to remember, all of us, even our younger children, we have to make sure that we teach them how to wash hands. Washing hand is one of the basic things that we need to remember to prevent food poisoning. We've got to make sure that we keep food preparation surfaces, equipment, and utensils clean. Okay, preparation, prepare and store raw meat and ready to eat food separately. That you can prevent food poisoning. So you store raw meat and ready to eat food separately. Normally, cooked food, when you put them in the refrigerator, you've got to put it on the top, and the raw meat, if you have maybe chicken, you have to put them in the bottom. Okay? So you've got also to ensure that your refrigerator and freezer are operating properly. It's always important to check this. Sometimes the weather can change. It gets, when in the summer, it gets sometimes hot. When in winter, it gets cold. So you've got to make sure that you reset your refrigerator and also your freezer, because the normal temperature of your freezer or your refrigerator should be at least 4 degrees, 5 degrees sometimes, depending on the weather. But the freezer should be at minus 18 degrees Celsius. Now, all depends also on the weather, because some countries, they are very, very cold. For example, in Canada, it gets really cold. So you have to reset your refrigerator and your freezer at the correct temperature, depending on the weather of your country where you are. Okay, now make sure you check the use by date. Check the use by date. Remember always to store eggs in the refrigerator. As I said before, it depends on the weather, also the country where you are. Okay, keep it away from food and food preparation surfaces. Make sure you keep the pet away from food because of cross-contamination. Okay, defrost food, particularly meat and poultry, thoroughly before cooking. So when you have frozen meat, frozen food, you've got to make sure that you defrost it thoroughly before you cook it. I've seen some people taking the food from the freezer straight away, they put it in the microwave to defrost the food. I won't recommend that, because any frozen food, if you want to defrost it, you've got to make sure that it is thoroughly defrosted before you begin to cook it. Okay, so what to do if you have symptoms of food poisoning? What do you do? Are you just going to sit down and begin to moan and cry? Now, if you suspect you are suffering from food poisoning, it is always important to, I recommend you that you visit your doctor as soon as possible. That's very important, okay? So visit your GP, visit your doctor as soon as possible to make sure they give you some solution, because food poisoning illness can be nasty. It can be very dangerous. If we don't do it on time, if we don't get help on time, sometimes it can, result into death. So we've got to make sure that as soon as we have those symptoms, we have to see the doctor as soon as we can. The next session we're going to talk about is food contamination. Okay, food contamination. Food contamination. That's what we're going to talk about. Food contamination. Now, here we're going to talk about contamination and impregnation. How do you prevent food contamination? How bacteria survive, stock rotation, and cross contamination. Okay, so we're going to pause just for 5 minutes on a break, and then we're going to come back. We'll continue on food contamination. I'll see you. Welcome back. So on this next section, we're going to talk about food contamination. Contamination and its prevention, that's what we're going to cover in this section, how bacteria survive, stock rotation, and also cross-contamination. Now, the contamination and its prevention, a different type of food contamination, different type of food contamination. Now, all food are at risk of becoming contaminated, depending on how you handle it, how you prepare it, and also how you store it. Okay, remember, we talk about food safety. Okay, so the handling, the preparation, and also the storage in the way that prevent food poison illnesses. Okay, so remember, all food are at risk of becoming contaminated, now which can increase the chance of the food making someone sick. Now, as I promised you before, that I'm going to cover this into details, the three main types of food contamination. So the chemical, physical, and also biological. Okay, the first one is chemical, could be sanitizer, pesticides, or detergent. On the physical one, it's any foreign object. The biological, we have fungi, parasites, or virus. Okay. Now, biological contamination is when bacteria or toxins contaminate food, and remember, is a common cause of food poisoning and food spoilage. For example, we have salmonella. Some of the most common places of bacteria to grow are the human body, dust roll, meat, pests, kitchen cloth, air food, and food handler clothing. Okay, so these are the most common places for bacteria to grow. The human body temperature is 37 degrees because your body is warm. Remember, that gives chance to the multiplication of bacteria. We can find bacteria in the dust, the raw meat. You can find bacteria, E. coli, pests, in the kitchen cloth, in the air. You can find bacteria, food handler clothing. You can find bacteria. That's why personal hygiene need to be up to the standard. Okay. Now, physical contamination. Physical contamination, if it's a foreign contamination. Any foreign object that get into the food, that's what we call physical contamination, as long as you can see it with our naked eyes. Okay, this could be hair, glass, wood, fingernail, pests such as mice, rat, and cockroaches. You see, these the leaf droppings that can contaminate food. See, we have flies, an insect, jewelry is a physical contamination. Fake nails, it's a physical contamination. Okay, so if you work in the kitchen, you've got some long nails or maybe some fake nails, you've got to make sure that you get rid of them as soon as you enter the kitchen, because you see, we don't want to cause any cross-contamination. So you've got to be the kind of person, if you're a lady, you love your nails, so you've got to be the kind of person that you're prepared to get rid of those nails. So remember, it is all about the consumers. It is all about the customers, so that they don't get sick because of the love of our nails. So we have to make sure we get rid of them if you want really to work in the kitchen. Okay. Now, the next one is how bacteria survive. How bacteria survive. You see, bacteria need a constant source of food to survive, especially protein. Okay, now bacteria need water, oxygen, I need time, I need temperature for their growth. If we don't have water, oxygen, time, and temperature, the bacteria cannot multiply. So they need all these components in order for them to grow. Now, high-risk food are those that have ideal conditions for bacterial growth. Now, this means they are usually neutral in acidity, high in starch, and also protein, and also moist. So we're not going to go into details on how bacteria survive in this level 2, but on level 3, we try to get into details so that people understand how to avoid the growth of or multiplication of bacteria. Okay. And next, we're going to talk about stock rotation that I like so much. Stock rotation. Remember, as a food business owner, by controlling the shelf life of food in storage using what we call the principle of first in, first out. That's what recording it's really important. Do you know the amount of food that you have in storage? Do you know the amount of food that you have in your freezer? So you've got to be able to record everything. You've got to know every item that you have in your storage. Now, if you don't record your food, you're not going to know what you have in your storage. Then it is going to be difficult for you to apply the principle of first in, first out. So first in, first out is very important. For example, given a simple example, you have bread in your freezer. You know, some people, they freeze bread. Yeah, there's nothing wrong about that. You can freeze bread. But when you get a new one, make sure you eat first the one that was there before. And then you replace it with the one that you've just bought. Okay, that's what we call first in, first out. Now, this principle reduces the risk of food becoming unfit for human consumption due to mild and food spoilage organism. Okay, now food produced in our catering establishment is rotated by labeling. Labeling is very important. It's going to help you in terms of stock rotation. So what we do, we rotate by labeling with the use by date, which is, remember, the maximum shelf life, and before, best before is used most in the supermarket. So use by date and also best before. Okay. So the next section, we're going to talk about cross-contamination. What is cross-contamination? Remember, cross-contamination occurs when bacteria or pathogens are transported from one place to another or from one object to another. For example, you can be wearing an apron, but when the apron is not clean enough, is not clean, that can cause cross-contamination. Maybe you've got some bacteria on your apron, and when you are cutting or chopping some meat, or you are, preparing food because your clothing are not clean, then the bacteria can be transported from one object to another. That's what we call cross-contamination. Now, the common sources include clothing, as I'm explaining now, utensils, for example, knives. If you use that knife to cut meat, and the same knife without washing it, you use it to cut vegetable, that cross-contamination. Now, personal hygiene, okay? I may have long nails, and those long nails, I've got some dirt inside my long nails, and then I'm touching vegetable or meat without washing my hand. That can cause cross-contamination. If you feel my hand here, in my hand we have the bacteria called staphylococcus. So if we don't wash our hand, those bacteria can get into our food, and that's what we call cross-contamination. And the person eat that food and they become sick because as a result of eating that contaminated food, and become sick. So that's really dangerous. We have to avoid. Pest also can cause cross-contamination. Yeah, cross-contamination, like the mice, the droppings get into the food, and that can cause cross-contamination. Okay, so waste control is very important when you're in the kitchen. We always advise clean as you go. Clean as you go when you're preparing food. It's very easy. See, when you are working in an environment where it's very clean, it's very pleasant. It's very pleasant, okay? Regular cleaning, raw food storage. How do you store that? And also the chopping board. Very important to avoid what? Cross-contamination. When it comes to raw food storage, as I said before, when you're storing raw food in the refrigerator, make sure you put it in the bottom. When the cooked one, you put it on the top. Okay, the chopping board here. Okay, we've got the color code of chopping board, and most people, especially when you're working in a food environment, you've got to understand the coding. Okay, so the white board is used for bakery and dairy product. Okay, white board is used for bakery and dairy product. Yellow, cooked meat. Brown, bold, vegetable. Red board, raw meat. Blue board, raw fish. And the last one, green board for salads and the fruit. I don't know if you have those different types of board in your kitchen. You see, when you have those different colors and you stick to them, if it's yellow, you use it for cooked meat, it also prevents contamination. It prevents cross-contamination, okay? So it's always important, if you are serious about your food safety and hygiene standards in your food establishment, you've got to follow all these rules, okay? Good. We're going to talk about storage and temperature control. Storage and temperature control. Why do we control the temperature of food? Why is it so important to control the temperature of food? And how to control the temperature of food? So all these need to be taught. They need to be learned so that people understand. Okay. Now, storage and temperature control. Food that is susceptible to bacteria, physical or chemical, that can cause food poisoning, they need to be stored at the correct temperature. It is very important, because if you don't store food at the correct temperature, remember the multiplication of bacteria. Now, why do you control the temperature of food? Remember, bacteria multiply very quickly at 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this, in order for me to explain all different levels of temperature, I'm going to give you these. We're going to go there. So we're going to go back. It's a temperature control. All right. So this picture here you can see on my slide is going to help you. It's going to help you so that you know where to keep food. Okay. So we're going to start from the bottom one and going up. So I said before, the temperature in your freezer is minus 18 degrees Celsius. Minus 18 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature of your freezer. And when it's going up to 1.4 degrees Celsius, that we call the chill temperature. Chill temperature. And when you go up to 5 degrees, so between 4 to 5 degrees, that's the temperature of your refrigerator. Now, remember, as I said, it depends on the weather. In case about the normal temperature of your refrigerator should be 4 degrees, sometimes 5 degrees. And we start going up now, remember, 5 degrees going up to 37 degrees. That's what we call the danger zone. Why do we call danger zone? We call danger zone because bacteria multiply very rapidly in this range of temperature. So before 5 degrees, from 5 degrees to 37 degrees. So in this range, there is a rapid growth of bacteria. So what do you have to do? Keep food out of the danger zone. Keep food out of the danger zone. And from 60 now we go to 63 degrees. If you're working in a restaurant, every time when you serve food on the plates, we have what we call the hot holding temperature. That's supposed to be 63 degrees. 63 degrees, when someone eating food on the plate, it has to be at least 63 degrees Celsius, okay? And we go up on 70, up to 74 degrees Celsius, that we call cooking temperature. So when you're cooking the food, it has to be at least 74 degrees Celsius. That's the cooking temperature, 74 degrees. And we go up 80, 90, and we go up to 100 degrees Celsius. That we call the boiling point, 100 degrees Celsius. Now remember, at this temperature, most of bacteria, they die. But some of the resistant bacteria are very stubborn, or we call toxins and spores. They normally don't die. Okay, they can resist that high temperature of boiling point. Okay, so this picture, it's really easy to understand it. Okay, you can have it in your restaurant, in your kitchen, so that you understand. Now, the principle is keep hot food hot and keep cold food cold. Okay, so that's the temperature. Now, I'm going to repeat it again. So we said food poisoning bacteria, they multiply, okay, very quickly between 5 to 60 degrees. So remember, at 75 degrees or 74 degrees, that's the cooking temperature. 63 degrees, that's a hot holding temperature when you're serving food. And 100 degrees, that's what we call the boiling point. So remember the golden rule: keep food out of the danger zone by keeping it completely hot or cold. Okay, so that's the danger zone. Now, how to control the temperature of food? Cooking food thoroughly to a minimum temperature of 74 to 75 degrees, and not too far in advance. So 74 to 75 degrees, that's the level of the cooking temperature. Now, in order to control the temperature of food, we monitor temperature from delivery to service. So we normally have these small apparatus, small machine that we use to make sure we monitor the food. Okay, so we must monitor temperature of food using this machine we call thermometer. Okay, it's a probe thermometer. So we must check frozen food by placing that thermometer between the packs. So for example, if you have the frozen food, you put a probe inside the food, between the food, and it will tell you if it's minus 18 degrees, minus 17, minus 15, it's going to tell you. So if you are in a restaurant, you've got to have one of these type of probe thermometers, okay? Now, if you find that the food is at the wrong temperature, you must report to your supervisor or to your chef. Okay, so remember, when you're serving food, to avoid people eating cold food, make sure it's at least 63 degrees Celsius. That's what we call a hot holding temperature for food.